The shovel struck something that didn't sound like earth. It rang, clean and cold, like a bell calling through the ribs of the night. Eli Carter froze, both hands clenched on the wooden handle, breath rising in pale ribbons under a Kentucky moon. The old paddock lay silent around him, a fence chewed by weather and time, hoof prints like dark thumbprints pressed into the dust. He had come out only to check a loose latch, to soothe a skittish mare with a soft voice and a feed bucket. He hadn't planned to dig. He hadn't planned to change his life. Wind moved through the oaks like a sigh that carried names he didn't know. Beyond the sagging barn, the hills rolled in black waves, and the county road stitched a thin, tired line toward town. Eli's boots had learned all the dirt on that road. Hiring days, layoff days, days spent praying for rain that never listened. Foreclosure had taught him the shape of empty rooms. Auctions had taught him how to keep a straight face while strangers weighed the remains of a life. Tonight, the lesson was different. Tonight, the ground was speaking in metal. He crouched, pushing aside the shovel-scarred soil with his fingers. The mare, an old gray with tender eyes, stood near the fence, watching him with the solemn interest horses reserve for human troubles. She had led him here, snorting and pawing at the same patch of earth until it looked like a question, until Eli fetched his shovel to answer it. He was no superstitious man, not outwardly. Faith to him was quiet and bone-deep, the sort that gets you through a dry season and into the next. But there are nights when the ordinary world thins, when moonlight sharpens, when a sound like a bell under the ground makes you think of angels hiding in the dirt. His fingertips brushed iron, a rim, a lid, a circle no root had dared to split. Eli dug faster, the shovel biting through loam and little stones, his heartbeat gathering pace. Every strike echoed back a little louder, as if the thing itself were waking up. He was careful. Poverty trains a man to be careful, and he cleared a ring of earth until the object's outline breathed on its own. A metal lid, wide as a basin, set into something older than the barn's last paint. He leaned close and blew dust from a keyhole the size of a thumbnail. Lightning stitched itself across a far-off cloud bank, and for a moment the farm was a negative photograph, all white bones and black sky. He thought about the week behind him, the courthouse steps, the braided voice of the auctioneer, the murmurs when the price dropped to a number that made men raise eyebrows. The farm had been a thoroughbred nursery once, a proud sweep of paddocks and white rails and stories with smooth coats. Then a family line had broken and neglect had done what neglect always does. No one wanted it. Too many repairs, too much dead grass, too many ghosts chewing hay in the stalls. Eli had wanted it anyway. He'd wanted a chance. He set the shovel aside and pressed his ear to the lid. Silence except for the mare's soft breathing and the little sounds of night creatures rearranging their lives. He pushed at the lid. It didn't budge. He slid the shovel's tip under its lip and levered gently. Something gave. Not a movement, but a promise of movement. He tried again, muscles corded, boot heel digging for purchase, a grunt that turned into a prayer without his permission. Lord, if this is trouble, let me know. The lid shifted the width of a fingernail and stopped. Eli sat back on his heels, sweat cooling on his neck, dirt in the half-moons of his nails. He thought of his mother's Bible, soft with use, of verses underlined with a dull pencil, "Seek, and ye shall find." He thought of the rumor he'd heard in town. Old Whitaker, a rich breeder whose name rode hard on every fence board, had once stashed something during a bad year, swearing he'd come back for it when the tax man stopped sniffing. Folks laughed it off. People loved to tell stories that hid empty cupboards. The mare tossed her head, ears pricked toward the lid, as if hearing a second bell Eli couldn't catch. He looked at her, then at the keyhole. "You brought me here," he said softly, smiling at his own foolishness. He was a broke farmer with a rusted truck and a patched jacket, standing in a field he barely owned, talking to a horse and a hole and a God who had kept him alive long enough to kneel in this exact rectangle of light. The thought landed in him with the weight of a reply. Eli wiped his palms on his jeans, gripped the shovel again, and decided to keep digging. Whatever waited under that lid had been waiting a long time. Tonight it had rung his name. By morning the farm wore the daylight like a confession. Sun seeped over the ridge and spilled into the hollow, showing every flaw in honest detail. Fences sagged where nails had given up. The barn's roof flashed thin in places where rain had practiced for years. The grass in the pasture was more memory than feed, a brittle whisper of greener seasons. Eli walked the fence line with a coil of wire and a pocketful of bent staples, the gray mare shadowing him like a cloud with a heartbeat. He had a list in his head, as long as any prayer, and a budget that belonged to another man's life. He had bought the place for pennies because pennies were what he had. At the courthouse auction, men had looked at their boots or at the sky, pretending they weren't doing math. The auctioneer's voice rose and fell, trying to charm a past into a future. When the price dropped to a number so low it felt like gossip, Eli's hand went up before he could scold it back down. A few faces turned, a couple of small smiles. Someone coughed into his hat, either laughter or pity. Papers changed hands. A key, cold as a slate creek, passed from the county clerk to Eli's palm. The key weighed less than a blessing and more than a dare. He had slept his first night in the smallest room of the farmhouse, on a cot that smelled faintly of old soap and cedar. The house had the tired elegance of a widow who refused to look anything but proper, wallpaper lifting at the seams, a narrow staircase that held its breath when you climbed it, window panes that trembled at their own transparency. In the kitchen, a cast-iron stove promised warmth if fed, and a calendar from another year offered to keep count again if asked. Eli had boiled coffee on that stove and eaten a heel of bread with honey, saying grace over the meal because grace had multiplied smaller things. Now, under a sky clean with blue, he told himself the truth. He was scared. Scared the roof would leak and so would his luck. Scared the bank would remember his name too easily. Scared that what little faith he had would be tested in practical, daily ways that left no room for holy language. He bent a fence staple straight between his teeth and hammered it home with the butt of his hand, knuckles barking. The mare nuzzled his shoulder. "I know," he murmured. "We'll get there." Eli came from people who had learned the grammar of drought, where to put the period in a prayer, how to keep a sentence going when the crops did not. His father had run cattle on leased land. His mother had kept numbers and verses tidy. And Eli had tried a little of everything on the rural menu: seasonal construction, a stint at the limestone quarry, hauling hay for men who paid cash and forgot. The farm wasn't a dream so much as a place to stand. Dirt that was his, broken or not. He checked the troughs and shook his head. The pump wheezed like a stubborn old judge. The water came, but it resented the labor. The stalls needed mucking. The fields wanted reseeding. 1,000 little needs lined up, each asking politely to be first. And there, on the far edge of the main paddock, was the patch he had opened by moonlight, the disk of disturbed soil dark as a secret. He had covered it again before dawn. Fear of thieves, fear of himself. But the memory of that clean bell sound had followed him into his coffee, into the swing of his hammer, into the way the morning smelled like a chance. Here's where we pause, just for a breath. If you're listening because you love stories of hard land and harder choices, of miracles that look like the ordinary, until they tilt their faces toward you, stick with me. If tales of faith stitched into grit help you lift your own day, hit that subscribe and stay close. I'll show you a place where a man with nothing but calluses and a prayer finds a keyhole in the ground, and how the turning of it changes more than a bank account. There's more dust and more light ahead. By noon, Eli had fixed 3 posts, half-solved the pump, and decided to speak to town about feed. He drove the truck that afternoon, its engine coughing like an old smoker's laugh, and bought the cheapest bales the feed store carried. The owner, a woman with hands like braided rope, gave him a discount that pretended not to be one. "The Whitaker place," she said when he gave her the address. "Haven't heard that name said straight in years. You fix it up, it'll drink your sweat but pay you back in peace. Peace spends slow," Eli said, smiling without showing teeth. "Sometimes slow is the right speed," she replied. On his way out, he ran into Bo Whitaker's foreman. Big man, hat like a roof, boots too clean. "You the fella took the old place?" the foreman asked. Eli nodded. The foreman's smile had a hinge in it. "Mr. Whitaker's sentimental about that ground. Family history. If you're looking to flip, he'd oblige you with a fair offer. Save you some heartache." "I'm looking to keep," Eli said. "Heartache and all. Suit yourself." The foreman tipped his hat with a courteous flourish that held more land than kindness. Land's got long memory. Sometimes it remembers things better left where they are. Eli drove back with the bales and the words riding shotgun. He unloaded, sweating through his shirt, hearing again the sound the shovel made against the lid. Land remembers, he thought. Maybe it remembers debts. Maybe it remembers promises. The sun tilted west. Shadows lengthened like good advice. He carried the last bale into the barn and stood a minute in the cool to breathe. The mare whickered from the paddock and tossed her head toward the far fence, toward the oaks that had once framed a training track. now only a faint horseshoe of packed earth and weeds. Eli wiped his hands and walked out to her, curiosity tugging. She started for the oaks, then looked back to see if he followed. He did. At the edge of the shade, she stopped and pawed the ground, carefully, deliberately, the way a horse tells you where it hurts or where it hopes. Back to it, then, Eli said softly. He fetched the shovel from the tack room, and with the afternoon leaning into evening, he returned to the lid hidden under a skin of dirt. He wasn't the kind to go chasing legends, and yet his whole life had been a quiet chase. For work, for a word that healed, for a crack of luck wide enough to step through. He knelt and brushed away the cover he had thrown on at dawn. Metal winked in a slit of light. He set the shovel like a lever and felt the ground answer with that same clean bell. "Okay," he whispered. "To the mare, to the oak, to the Lord. Show me." It began with a sound Eli had never heard a horse make, a low, careful thrum, like a hummingbird slowed to human time, like a note a cello would play if it loved the dirt. The mare stood over the spot, head lowered, breath steady, and thrummed her throat softly until the sound seemed to come from the ground itself. Eli felt it in his kneecaps, in the old bruise of a childhood fall, in the hinge of his jaw. He set his palm flat to the soil, and the vibration climbed his arm like a thread of music. "Easy, girl," he murmured. He didn't pull his hand away. He pushed the shovel under the lid again. It lifted a whisper, then sank back, stubborn with years. Eli tried the other side. No movement. He walked the shovel around like a slow clock, teasing at the seam, feeling where the earth yielded and where it clenched. The mare moved to keep him company, shadowing his circle with her own. Once she stopped and fixed on a point a few feet from the lid and scraped the earth with the edge of her hoof. The scrape revealed metal glinting dull and dark, a small plate, about the size of a man's hand, bolted into something below with flat-headed screws whose slots had nearly dissolved. Eli knelt and brushed the plate clean with his sleeve. Letters rose as he wiped, not engraved so much as pressed in by a steady hand. He squinted, tilted his head for light, and read, "Whittaker Training Trust, 1937 water, oak bell key with the keeper." He said the words out loud, and they sounded older than the plate, older than the oak. Water, oak, bell. He looked up at the oak, its crown spread wide as a blessing. He listened. The mare's odd thrum had dwindled to silence. He looked toward the old well near the barn, capped now with a wooden cover and a rusted pulley that had forgotten its job. And bell. He tried to remember if he'd seen a bell anywhere on the property. Churches had bells. Schoolhouses had bells. Barns had dinner triangles and wind chimes. Racetracks had bells at the start. He stood and shaded his eyes, making a visor of his hand against the slanting light. Along the far fence line, near the ghost of the training oval, a broken post rose crook-shouldered against the sky. On its top sat a socket where something had once been mounted. Round base, 4 old bolts. Eli felt the kind of certainty his mother used to call a nudge. Bell, he thought. There. He brushed dirt from his palms and crossed the paddock, the mare ambling behind him as if they were a small herd. At the broken post, he set his fingers to the rusted bolts and found them stubborn. He laughed at himself and went back for a wrench, the kind of back and forth that fills a farmer's day. When he returned, the light was lower and the shadows laid long, but the bolts surprised him. One turned with a sigh, another with a pop, the third after a patient minute, the fourth with a tiny shriek. He lifted the socket free like a crown and found, hidden in the hollow beneath, a shape that made the skin between his shoulder blades tighten, an old weathered ring with 2 teeth like a key no modern lock would want. Key with the keeper. He turned the ring in his hand, testing the weight of it, the honesty of its metal. The mare nosed his shoulder. "Keeper," he said, half to her, half to the unblinking evening. "You kept it, didn't you?" Back at the lid, he knelt and held the key over the tiny keyhole, feeling ridiculous and chosen at the same time. The teeth met the slot in a way that made his heart stutter. He pushed gently. The ring seated with a soft, homecoming click. He turned. At first, nothing but the quiet thrill of mechanism rousing from sleep. Then a sound like a swallow in a chimney, a little rush of air, and the lid moved with the grace of a memory remembered. Eli eased it open, expecting the thunk of weight and getting instead a slow, reluctant pivot that told him the hinges were hidden and patient. The mare backed a step and snorted, not afraid exactly, but alert. Below the lid, darkness pooled like a small night. A smell rose, a dry, old smell, tin and paper and a thread of clover as if a field had been folded and set away. Eli fetched a flashlight from the barn and came back at a trot. He hadn't realized he owned hope as a muscle until he felt it work. He clicked the light on and sent a pale beam down into the hole. The beam struck wood first, a box, built snug to the earth's sides, top edges neat, corners dovetailed, wood grayed almost to silver. There was a second lid, this one latched with a simple brass hasp that had surrendered its shine to the years. He crouched and reached in. His fingers found the hasp, and then his grit failed him for a half breath. He heard his mother's voice. Measure twice. Cut once. He heard his father. Don't spend what you can't replace, boy. He heard the foreman's voice from the feed store. Land remembers. He lifted the hasp. It rose without complaint. Inside, the box held papers, wrapped in oilcloth that had done its job too well. Eli lifted the bundle as if it were a sleeping child. Under the oilcloth, envelopes whispered, string crisscrossed like careful thinking, and on top lay a ledger bound in buckram with the gold stamp title, Whittaker Training, Register 1935-1939. He opened the ledger and saw names he had heard in barbershops and feed stores, sires and dams whose line had thrown champions that wore roses in newspapers. Beside each pairing, numbers marched in neat columns, fees, foalings, winnings, until the last pages turned strange. The handwriting tilted, excitement visible in the angle of ink. Entries stopped listing horses and began listing deposits, withdrawals, and notes with a different pulse. Broke the purse again, can't show it. Hide it until the bank stops paying attention. Prohibition's over, but the taxman isn't. Keep the trust off the books. Bell, well, Oak, for my grandson if we ever make it back. Eli felt the hair rise on his arms. He set the ledger aside and lifted the envelopes. Inside, he found bonds whose dates put them in the Roosevelt years, receipts for gold purchases, photographs of the training track crowded with hats and hope, a letter sealed with red wax whose bloom had flattened into a dull rose. He set everything carefully to one side and reached deeper into the box. His knuckles brushed metal again, smaller this time, tins, the sort folks used for biscuits, round and dented, lids tight. He lifted one and pried at the top with his thumb. The lid popped. Inside, faint in the beam of his light, circles slept in a row, stacked like bread. He tipped the tin and coins slid into his palm, heavy, old, with eagles wearing a lion's share of history. $10 gold pieces, $20 pieces that caught the light like quiet applause. The mare breathed out, a sound that might have been relief. Eli closed his hand around the coins and shut his eyes. Somewhere in the near distance, a truck door slammed. Voices, too, carried over the fence in that way voices do when they aren't trying to be quiet. Eli set the coins back into their tin, returned the tin to the box and lowered the inner lid with a reverence that surprised him. He eased the outer lid down and turned the key back to closed. He brushed soil over the seam with his bare hands until the hole looked like a rough patch a horse had scuffed. Later, he told the ground, and then, to the mare, thank you. He stood and turned toward the voices. The foreman from the feed store had returned, and beside him, stepping easy through someone else's grass as if all grass reported to him, came Bo Whittaker. Bo Whittaker walked like the land owed him a greeting. His boots pressed the soil with the weight of generations, shoulders broad beneath a jacket that probably cost more than Eli's truck. The foreman followed a half-step behind, watchful, like a dog that knew its master's moods. Eli wiped his hands on his jeans and tried to steady his breath. The coins still burned against his palm in memory, though he had returned them to the tin, sealed and hidden again. He prayed that no soil on his face betrayed what he had seen. Afternoon, Bo said, voice slow and thick like molasses poured on iron. His eyes swept the paddock, the mare, the patched fences, the man standing between hunger and inheritance. How's she treating you? Eli shrugged. She's tired, but she stands. Bo's smile was a razor folded neat. That place'll bleed you dry. I reckon you figured that out already. My daddy raised horses here. Champions. Blood that still runs at Churchill. Hate to see it rot. Eli nodded, saying nothing. His silence was armor. Words cost more than feed. You're not the first fool who thought he could breathe life into bones, Bo went on. But maybe you'll be the last. I'll take it back off your hands. Generous price. Enough for you to start somewhere else. Smaller. Easier. Eli met his gaze. I didn't buy it to sell. The foreman shifted, boots scuffing. Bo's jaw tightened. Stubbornness is a fine way to starve. Land has memory, Carter. This one remembers Whitaker's. Maybe you'll learn to respect that. I respect work, Eli said evenly. The land answers to that. Bo studied him a long moment, then tipped his hat. We'll talk again. The foreman gave Eli a look, half warning, half promise, and they walked back across the field. Their figures shrank into evening, but their presence clung like smoke. When they were gone, Eli leaned against the mare, forehead pressed to her neck. She smelled of hay and sweat and trust. They know, he whispered, or they think they do. That night sleep came brittle. Every creak of the old farmhouse was a footstep. Every gust through the shutters sounded like someone at the latch. He dreamed of ledgers that bled ink, of coins melting in his hands, of voices chanting Water Oak Bell. When dawn pried his eyes open, he felt as though he had carried stones in his chest all night. Work steadied him. He mucked stalls, patched a leak in the roof, and mended a harness. But all day the weight of the buried box pressed through the soil like a heartbeat. By mid-afternoon he fetched the shovel again. He told himself it was foolishness, yet his body moved with the certainty of hunger. The lid gave more easily this time, as though the lock had remembered him. The mare stood close, eyes calm. He lowered the box onto the grass, unwrapped the oilcloth, and spread the contents beneath the oak's shade. The coins caught the light with a solemn gleam. The ledger whispered names that history books had forgotten but gamblers remembered. Eli traced the entries with a finger. Whitaker money, hidden from the taxman, salted away through depression and war. Yet why here? Why a key with the keeper? A mare pawing at the dirt generations later? He was so absorbed he didn't hear the neighbor approach until a voice spoke from the fence. Find something, Carter? It was Mrs. Langley, a widow who lived 2 miles down the road. Her basket of eggs rested on her hip, eyes sharp beneath her kerchief. She was known for knowing things, the kind of woman who gathered truth the way hens gathered feed. Just old papers, Eli said quickly, folding the ledger. She eyed the coins, the tins, the careful spread on the grass. Looks like more than paper. Eli's throat went dry, but Mrs. Langley surprised him. She set the basket on the fence post and leaned in. My daddy used to tell stories. Said old man Whitaker hid his winnings, swore the land would carry them to the rightful heir. Folks laughed, but Daddy never did. Rightful heir? Eli asked. Not of blood, she said, lowering her voice. Of need. Whitakers were proud, but pride doesn't outlast dust. Maybe the Lord aimed those coins your way. Her words sank deep. Eli felt the soil itself listening. If Bo finds out, he'll take it. He always takes. She lifted her basket. So you best pray hard and hide harder. What's buried doesn't always belong to the one who planted it. She left with the slow dignity of someone who had delivered prophecy. Eli repacked the box with trembling hands, lowered it again into the earth, and brushed the soil smooth. That night, he sat at the kitchen table with the ledger open, a single lamp burning. He read the last entry again. For my grandson, if we ever make it back. A family promise, buried in faith and greed alike. Eli thought of his own father, long gone, who had left nothing but calloused lessons. What did it mean to inherit what was not yours, but which had chosen you anyway? The next morning, Bo returned, this time with men. 3 trucks parked at the gate, engines ticking. The foreman leaned against the hood, arms crossed. Bo dismounted his truck with the air of a man stepping onto his own porch. We'll be straight, Carter, he said. That ground holds more than dirt. I want what's mine. Hand it over and you keep the farm. Eli's heart slammed, but his voice held. I don't know what you're talking about. Bo's eyes narrowed. Don't play me. My grandfather put it there. You think a broke drifter has more right than blood? Eli squared his shoulders. Your blood buried it. My sweat found it. Maybe the Lord decided the line changed hands. Tension crackled like dry grass before a spark. The mare stamped her hoof, ears pinned. The foreman spat, muttering, Land's memory runs deep. Eli's palms itched to reach for the shovel, for the box, for proof. But proof would condemn him. Instead, he prayed silently, Lord, show me which fight is mine, and which is yours. Bo stepped closer, face inches from Eli's. Think hard, Carter. Tomorrow we come with more than words. They left in dust and threat. Eli stood alone in the paddock, the mare pressing against him like a sentinel. He looked at the oak, at the well, at the earth hiding a trust he hadn't asked for. Fear tightened his chest, but alongside it came something else. A rising flame of resolve. This was not just about coins or ledgers. It was about justice, about destiny choosing a man too poor to buy bread but rich enough to bear faith. Eli whispered into the dusk, "If they come tomorrow, Lord, give me the courage to stand." And in the silence that followed, the wind moved through the oak and it sounded like a bell. The night before the storm felt stretched thin, like a drumhead pulled tight. Eli sat at the kitchen table, the ledger open before him, the lantern flame trembling with each breath of wind sneaking through the shutters. He read the entries again and again, the words blurring into prayer and warning. Hide it until the bank stops paying attention. Bell, well, oak. For my grandson if we ever make it back. Every word weighed on him like inheritance. Yet he wasn't Whitaker blood. He was just a broke farmer with dirt under his nails, and a mare that had pawed the earth until she found what men with money had forgotten. And now Bo Whitaker, pride swollen in his chest, was coming with fists full of claim and trucks full of muscle. The mare stood restless in the paddock, pacing under the moon. Eli went out to her, laid a hand against her neck. "If this ends tomorrow," he whispered, "let it end honest." She breathed warm against his face, and for a moment he felt steadied, as though creation itself leaned close. At dawn, the sound of engines rolled across the ridge like thunder. Dust rose long before the trucks came into sight. Eli stood at the fence, boots planted, hands empty but strong. 3 trucks again, and this time men piled out. Broad, grim, carrying the kind of authority money rents but never truly owns. Bo emerged last, his hat tipped low, his eyes sharp as fence wire. "Morning, Carter," he said, voice too polite. "We'll finish our business today." Eli met his gaze. "There's no business between us." Bo's smile carried no warmth. "My grandfather buried what's mine. You dug it up, hand it over, and you walk away with your farm. Refuse, and I'll dig until I find it myself." Eli felt his chest burn. "You can dig all you like. The land doesn't answer to thieves." One of Bo's men stepped forward, shovel in hand, eyes fixed on the oak. Eli's stomach clenched, but before he could move, the mare bolted. She cut across the paddock like a gray streak of lightning, rearing before the man, hooves striking air with a scream that split the morning. The man stumbled back, shovel clattering to the dirt. Bo's face darkened. "You think a horse will keep you safe, Carter? I'll burn this place down before I let it slip away." "Burn it then," Eli said, voice steady though his knees trembled. "But know this, your family buried greed. What I found wasn't just money, it was truth. Your grandfather lied to the banks, to the law, to everyone who ever trusted his name. These papers prove it. You want them? Then the world will know who you really are." He held up the ledger, its buckram cover catching the light. Gasps rippled among the men. Even the foreman shifted uneasily, eyes darting between Bo and the book. Bo lunged forward, hand outstretched. "Give it to me." Eli stepped back, heart hammering, and shouted, "This ledger belongs to no Whitaker. It belongs to history, and history doesn't bow to you." For a moment the world froze. Wind rattled the oak branches. The mare stood wild-eyed and defiant, and Bo's men hesitated, unsure if they were following a leader or a sinking ship. Then from the road, another sound. Tires crunching gravel. A county sheriff's cruiser rolled up, dust swirling around it. Sheriff Harlan, broad as a barn door and older than both men's fathers, stepped out slow, hand resting on his belt. "Mornin', boys," he said, voice casual but edged. "Got a call about trouble brewing out here." His eyes swept the scene, the trucks, the men, the trembling horse, the ledger in Eli's hands. "Seems I arrived at the right time." Bo straightened, forced a smile. "Sheriff, this is family business. My grandfather left something here and this man is trying to steal it." Sheriff Harlan raised an eyebrow. "Funny. Court records show the property was auctioned legal. Carter here's the owner now. If something's in the ground, by law, it's his to report." "Report?" Bo spat. "That ledger isn't his. It's mine." The sheriff's eyes hardened. "Ledger, you say?" He turned to Eli. "Mind if I see it?" Eli hesitated, then stepped forward, placing the ledger in the sheriff's weathered hands. Harlan flipped through the pages, lips pressing tighter with each line. "Well now," he muttered. "Tax fraud, illegal winnings, undeclared assets. This is a crime scene wrapped in dust." He snapped the book shut. "And you, Whitaker, just admitted you knew it was here." Bo's face drained of color. "That's lies." But his men shifted uneasily. The foreman muttered under his breath. "Knew it had come back round." Sheriff Harlan gestured to the men. "Load up your trucks and head out. Now. I'll be keeping this ledger for evidence." The men obeyed, some quickly, some slowly. but none willing to test the sheriff. Bo lingered, fists clenched, eyes full of venom. He leaned close to Eli, voice low and dangerous. "This isn't over. You think Faith will save you? Faith won't stop what's coming." Eli held his ground. "Faith already has." Bo spat in the dirt and turned away, climbing into his truck. Engines roared, dust swallowed the horizon, and then silence returned. Only the sheriff, Eli, and the mayor remained. Harlan closed the ledger under his arm. "You'll need to come into town, Carter. Papers like this don't vanish easy. But I'll tell you something. What you did here took grit, and grit's worth more than gold in a county like ours." He tipped his hat and left, leaving Eli alone once more. Eli sank to his knees by the oak, trembling with exhaustion. He had defended nothing more than a box of lies and a handful of coins, yet it felt like he had defended the marrow of his life. The mare lowered her head, pressing her muzzle against his shoulder, grounding him in warmth. In that moment, the sky opened, and light poured down between the branches. It wasn't just dawn. It felt like revelation. Eli looked at the ground where the box lay buried, and he understood. What mattered wasn't the gold or the bonds or even the ledger. What mattered was that he had stood, poor, tired, and afraid, but he had stood. And the land had answered with memory. Not Whitaker memory, but his. The days that followed felt lighter, as though the farm itself had exhaled. The trucks never came back. The sheriff carried the ledger into town, promising a long trail of courtrooms and reckonings that no man could bribe his way past. Eli stayed behind, tending fences, patching roofs, feeding the mare who had led him to the truth. Each nail he drove and each board he lifted seemed steadier, as if the ground beneath him had finally chosen its keeper. He thought often about what lay buried, the tins of coins, the faded bonds, the relics of greed hidden under oak and soil. Part of him wanted to bring it all into daylight to let the world weigh its value. But another part knew the real treasure had already been unearthed. Courage. The kind that doesn't glimmer, doesn't jingle in a pocket, but stands firm when the powerful arrive with threats and shadows. Neighbors began to stop by, curious about the man who had bought the Whitaker place for pennies and faced the Whitakers themselves without bowing. Mrs. Langley brought eggs and stories reminding him that faith often hides in the smallest hands. Others offered to help mend the track, to reseed the pastures, to bring life back into ground that had grown tired of arrogance. Slowly, the farm shifted. Slowly, Eli shifted with it. At night, when the wind moved through the oak, he sometimes heard the faint echo of a bell. Not iron against iron, but the kind of bell that rings inside a man's chest when he knows he has chosen rightly. It reminded him that he hadn't been alone that morning. Faith had stood with him, steady as the mare's breathing, strong as the roots beneath his boots. And here lies the heart of it. Wealth is not counted only in coins. True wealth lives in integrity, in the strength to face down pride, in the decision to protect what is just rather than grasp what is easy. Eli had been a broke farmer, a man with little more than calloused hands and a prayer. Yet in standing his ground he discovered riches no thief could touch, riches that outlast barns and ledgers, riches measured in gratitude, in faith, and in the peace of honest labor. So let this story remind us all, blessings don't always appear wrapped in gold. Sometimes they arrive as courage in a trembling heart, or as a horse pawing the earth until the truth rises. Sometimes the miracle is not what you find, but what you become in the finding. If this tale moved you, if it lit a spark of hope or strength in your own walk, I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe, share, and carry these stories with you, because each one is a seed planted in soil that longs to bloom. Here, we believe in more than chance. We believe in destiny, in justice, and in the quiet power of faith. And just like Eli Carter, we believe that when you stand for what's right, the land, and heaven itself, will remember your name. Remember, gratitude turns dust into bread, faith turns fear into courage, and justice turns poverty into legacy. May you hold fast to these truths, in your own field, under your own sky. Thank you for walking through this story with me. Until the next one, keep your faith steady and your heart open. Here, who rules is the truth, and who decides is you.